Good morning, folks. Just like to ask if you're sitting near a chair, if we could kind of compress in the middle. We have a number of people standing. We'd like everybody to be comfortable for the general session and the wonderful day that we're about to have here. So if you could just move in, or if you have a seat at your table that's available, if you could just raise your hand maybe to indicate how many seats. That would help people to come in from the back and fill in some of these chairs and tables. And from over on the side, we've got some chairs. We'd like you to be really comfortable. We don't need you to sit on rocks. We don't ask that. All right. Well, thank you. We're going to be getting started in just a few moments as soon as we get everybody seated. But welcome here. We're glad to have you here in Albany.
Good morning, everyone. We already have a little bit more voice than we had on Monday. Good morning, everyone. Now, on Monday, I do have to say, no competition with our middle and high school folks. There was a section in the middle that did a little wave thing. There was a lot of enthusiasm there, and I didn't see that this morning, but I have no doubt that, thank you very much. So, No doubt that you're as excited to be here as we are to have you. And quite frankly, if Commissioner and I had it our way, this room would be 4, 5, 6 times as large because we think the work is that important. On Monday and Tuesday, we started off with K-5 on ELA and math, and we had really 2 terrific days. And I want to define what I mean by terrific. This is very difficult work. My colleague Kate Gerson will talk in a little bit about the shifts that are necessary, the instructional shifts that are necessary to really bring the Common Core alive. And many of you are familiar with those, but it's important that you hear them again this morning. I want to make sure that none of us are going into this work naive. This is very, very difficult work. Some of us have been doing exceptional work for years. Our kids have been performing admirably. They're getting into colleges. They're doing well. However, some of us remember the days when the scores came out and the first thing we as superintendents did was to look at the similar schools in our region. In other words, how did I do against the other schools in the county? And as long as I'm at the top for my former district, I was very comfortable with that. I didn't look much beyond that. Today is a very different day. Our kids are no longer just competing regionally. They are not just competing in the state or even nationally. We have to make sure that our kids are being prepared for international competition for jobs. Right now, there are roughly, and this is a gross estimate, 3 million jobs available, yet we don't have qualified people to fill them. Why is that? I want to make something very, very clear. I read another article in the New York Times this morning that says if it weren't for the damn teachers and administrators, our kids would be doing great. They're not doing their jobs on getting the kids ready for college and career. Let me be very clear about this. We have set a target at the state. Over the last 10 years, we set a target. Graduating with 5 Regents exams, 22 credits, and an ever escalation of the number of Regents exams at 65. What's happened across the state with the work that all of you are doing relative to that target? What's been happening? Increase, right? Very slow but sustained increase towards meeting the target that was officially set by the Board of Regents. More recently, the Regents are starting to set new targets. We call them college and career-ready aspirational goals. Many of you are very familiar with this. 75 on ELA, 80 on Regents. Most of you know for your districts what your college and career-ready aspirational rate is. Statewide graduation rate is about 74%. Statewide college and career-ready rate is about half of that at 34%. All of us should be having conversations within our districts and with our families saying that 34% is our new baseline. Based on a new set of targets that the Board of Regents is establishing, that the state is putting forward, that's our starting point. That is not the ceiling, folks. That's the floor. The common rhetoric would have you believe just the opposite, that you all should have been hitting a target that we hadn't yet set for you. So I want to be very clear of what our expectations are. Our expectations are that we all agree that that 34% is the floor from which we are now building. To get from that target that the board has set at 65, 22 credits, and 5 exams to where we want to go towards those aspirational components, we know full well we have to provide an array of tools, resources, and training to get you all ready to hit those targets just as you've done before and just as we have great confidence that you're going to do again. What you're going to see today is, again, a variety of tools. You'll see a number of resources on Engage 1.5, and you're going to see an increasing collection of experts that we've brought together who really know and understand deeply what the Common Core stands for, what it requires, and what it looks like when it's brought to life. So as we start to prepare for that, let's figure out, that's who's coming from our team. Let's figure out who's here from your teams. Let's first do an attendance piece, and I don't mean we're going to take attendance, just to be clear. How many of you have been here for the 2 previous days? Roughly half, okay? How many of you have never been to one of our institutes before? That's fantastic, I have to tell you. So where we join those two things is those of you who are new, you're going to have a tremendous amount to learn today, but just as Commissioner charged us all with on Monday, you have an extraordinary number and quality of partners sitting around the room. I go back to what I originally said. This is very difficult work, and we simply can't do it alone. We want to be partners with you in this work. You have partners all around the room. You have partners around the state within your network teams that are ready to move this work forward. So in roles, let's figure out who's here to help us roll the work out in your roles. How many of you are teachers? About a fourth. Principals. Terrific. Central office folks, superintendents, assistant superintendents. For you folks, I have to say, I was with the principals group yesterday, and I asked, there was a reason for my question, how many of you are aspiring superintendents? And before they raised their hand, they laughed. As a former superintendent, I read into that a little bit, but maybe I shouldn't have. How many of you are professional development folks and here from network teams? Terrific. A variety of roles, all of whom have one thing in common. We came into this profession for the same reason. I taught middle school. I was a principal. I was a superintendent. My beliefs haven't changed from the first day I walked into the classroom. We have to ever challenge ourselves to do bigger and better things for our kids, not simply to get them to the next grade, but so that they are ready, in fact, for when they walk outside of our schools for whatever they might encounter, which is exactly why we and 45 other states, 3 territories, Department of Defense schools have adopted the Common Core. Because what we were finding relative to that target, even though we kept meeting that graduation target that we had set, now we have something that we simply didn't have before. We have a phenomenal data set to ask a question about. Are those targets the right ones? And based on what the board has decided, based on what we as educators know, it's not the right target anymore, folks. And that's why we moved towards the aspirational goals. That's why we adopted the Common Core, because the Common Core represents what we now believe is the right track towards the new target. The Common Core, hopefully you're all aware, very different setup than what we've had before. The 1996 standards, the 2005 standards, were all mapped from kindergarten up. So if you were to put this into a graphic form, you would see that there was an achievement gap that we wanted to address, so we brought in new standards to address it. What happened, though, is that starting in kindergarten, we went up to 12th grade and didn't really address the achievement gap. We did what we thought would address it, but in fact it didn't. Because as one of our presenters said yesterday, the achievement gap has existed for roughly 60 years. We didn't do a whole lot to close the achievement gap with the standards. So we brought in new standards. We started from kindergarten again, and we went up. Achievement gap remained. So the question is, well, wait a minute. What do our kids not know, and what are they not able to do once they get to college and career? Maybe we should take a look at what those expectations are, talk to employers, talk to colleges and universities, talk to technical schools, find the best of the best standards in the country to say, what do they know that we need to know to put into our standards such that we can build a true staircase to get our kids ready? That's the design of the Common Core. They took those expectations and they mapped backwards. So why are we doing things under the Common Core in 4th grade that we used to do in 7th grade? Because now we have a much clearer read on what our kids need to know and be able to do to move forward, to be ready for whatever their choice is in the 21st century global economy. So then the second question that comes is, okay, very reasonable, makes a lot of sense. All of us as educators would agree in that. But the changes that are required, the shifts that Kate will talk about in a moment, they're significant. So let's ask 2 questions. Number one, why are we doing it so god-awfully fast? And what's so special about the Common Core relative to what we're doing now? And let's take those in reverse order. As educators, as I suggested, the first time I walked into a classroom, I knew why I was there. I had philosophical differences with what I was being asked to do all the way up until the introduction of the Common Core. Because the Common Core finally addressed what so many of us as educators have asked for years. Fewer standards, more time, the ability to really get into a text such that we don't have to say to a third of our classroom, I'm sorry, I will come back to you, I'll get you extra help. I have to move on to cover what's in the curriculum. Easy to say, very challenging, quite candidly, until you see it come true on an assessment, right? I understand that. But what Kate will talk to you about, what you'll see within this work, is that in fact, what we are doing within this work, how we're bringing the standards to life, how our curriculum and assessment teams are working hand in hand to make sure that what's demanded by the core, what's articulated in our curriculum modules, the lessons, the performance tasks that you're going to see, are a direct reflection of what's going to be on the assessments. The test guides that came out last week, hand in hand, curriculum and assessment, making sure that it is a direct reflection of what the kids need to know and be able to do relative to the Common Core, relative to readiness for the global 21st century stage that they're going to enter. So why the speed? Why can't we do K1 this year, 2-3 next year, and move on accordingly? If you look at one data point, it answers that question. The number of students, not just in universities, the number of kids in 2-year colleges, in technical schools, that aren't ready based on the fact that they're taking remediation courses, and we all know what remediation courses are, right? They are high school classes that students have to pay for that they do not get credit for. An increasing number of kids have to take those courses. They are already being held accountable for what's expected from the Common Core. They are already there. So the number of courses that these kids are taking for remediation without credit for cost does one thing: adds to their student loan total and gets them no closer to a meaningful diploma that has value, transactional value, in the marketplace today. Let's take another perspective on that. Based on that, what is the accumulation of student debt versus the number of kids graduating? For each of the courses that these kids are taking, there is roughly a 15% decrease in the likelihood that they're going to graduate. So what do they leave with? They leave with student debt. As of last year, student loan debt, now outpaces not just credit card debt, auto loan debt as well. We are approaching $1 trillion in student loan debt, and when you take into account the fact that as of last year, 27% of that amount was in default, you now have a real economic impact of what's happening, and yet those kids still don't have a meaningful certificate to go into the workplace and have a transaction that allows them to have a salary, health care, and other benefits that allow them to sustain a family and a middle-class lifestyle. So not only do we have a mismatch in our targets, we have an increasing dilemma in the economic marketplace. One could then argue we have a dilemma in the democratic marketplace because, again, what the economics drive are either success and satisfaction in the workplace or displacement and frustration. That has a direct impact on what we look like as a democratic society. Duke University came out with a study end of last week where they said consistent unemployment, did any of you read this? Did any of you see this? Consistent unemployment has the same effect on an individual as diabetes, as cardiac issues, as heavy smoking. So now, to prepare a workforce, and I'm going to come back to higher ed's role in this, to prepare a workforce, we have a couple of things that are motivating us. Our kids are already being held accountable to these standards. We cannot move fast enough to catch up to them, to get them ready, such that they are, in fact, walking out of our technical schools, our two-year schools, our universities, into our careers, ready and getting meaningful certification and transactional credential so that they can move forward. We have an economic impact that is slowly creeping up on us such that many of us don't understand what it means yet because it hasn't been realized for us in our backyard. We have a democratic impact, and now we have a health impact of this. So all of us say, great, we'll get them ready. What's going on in higher ed? What is their role at the table? We are building network teams at the higher ed level as well, and network teams are groups of professional developers that focus on the Common Core, that focus on data-driven instruction, and that focus on what it means to meaningfully evaluate someone, not to fire them, but to better prepare them for what they need to do relative to the readiness of our kids. We are also changing the assessments of what it means of how you can become a teacher. Most of you are aware on the existing exams, you can actually fail the mathematics portion and still pass the test to become an elementary teacher. Very, very problematic. The assessments are such now that not only do you need to know mathematics procedurally, and math teachers, you do not need to clap after what I'm about to say, you need to know the content. Andrew Chen is going to challenge you, challenge some of you like you've never been challenged before, to really get into the content and understand it, because if you don't know the depth of content, you are on a collision course with what the core requires. Fewer standards, deeper understanding. For too many of our teachers, below the procedural level, The content expertise simply isn't there. So Commissioner and I are challenging school districts and boards of education, even in these fiscally challenging times, to bolster their professional development line items in their budget such that we can focus on things exactly like that, things that we know but we are too often afraid to say. Our elementary teachers need content help. That is not a disparaging statement against our elementary teachers. That is simply a statement of fact. What we look at in terms of APPR, it is not a system to fire people. It is an integrated system of professional development that, done well, is based on the Common Core, based on effective cycles of feedback that challenges all of us to be better at what we do. I'm going to talk in a moment about the growth scores relative to the speed of rollout, but I want to be very clear about this. Commissioner and I were down on Long Island last Sunday visiting some of the communities and the schools that had been hit so hard by Sandy. And one of the teachers said, I lost my home. My kids are in class in the library because my classroom was flooded. I don't know when I'm going to get back in there. There's this cacophony throughout the day that challenges my kids. And yet, 2 years from now, I could get fired because I'm ineffective. And I introduced the language of the legislation to that group of teachers, and I said, from a superintendent's perspective, I'm going to use that law to my advantage because it says I may prefer 30/20A charges or dismissal charges against a teacher for 2 ineffectives. As a superintendent, I'm going to say, I know that that teacher in Long Beach lost their home, and yet on a Saturday afternoon, with other teachers, they were going door to door after they broke up that community into quadrants. They were going door to door knocking, making sure that their kids were there, that they were safe, and that they knew when they were coming back to school. Teachers were doing this who lost everything. So as a superintendent, I'm going to look at that and say, you know what? Year 1 is a gimme. That's my choice as a superintendent. I have that flexibility under the law. Also, within APPR, we're asking, but what about the growth scores? For 3.8, what's going to happen with the new assessments? Let's be candid. No different than 2010, we will see a dip in test scores. It would be dishonest if we thought anything different. That, no different than the aspirational performance measures, that's the new baseline for where we are putting our kids on a trajectory for college and career readiness. But we say, okay, number one, our first concern, obviously, is what does this mean for the kids, though? We as leaders, as educators, and as co-learners in this, need to have these conversations within our groups, within our schools, within our districts, about exactly how we're going to message this to our communities. But what does it mean for me as an educator who has a growth score attached to this and then a composite evaluation? What does it mean? If those proficiency levels drop, I was effective this year on my growth score. I very much could be ineffective next year. Well, maybe, but let me tell you how this system works. You are being compared, if you are a teacher in Syracuse, with the new assessments rolling out, you aren't compared to a criteria. In other words, you are not attached to that level of proficiency. You are attached to a norm. How do you compare to teachers who look a lot like you relative to the students in your classroom, their prior testing history, and the 3 levels of adjustment that we have built within the system, which is poverty, English language learner, and student with disability status? The teacher in Buffalo, the teacher in Bath, the teacher in Watertown, you'll notice my geography is fairly accurate here, Albany, Mid-Hudson, and Long Island. They are going through the same exact thing that you are. They have no more secrets than you do. So how you stack up relative to those teachers on a new test is not markedly different than where you are now. Some teachers are way out ahead on this work. We had a teacher advisory committee last week where we had a group of teachers telling us when the board adopted the Common Core standards, they locked in and they took off. They started building lessons around this. They were happy when the tri-state rubric came out because they finally had something to compare those lessons to say, we are on track. And if you don't know what I mean by the tri-state rubric, Kate will discuss this in just a moment. There were people moving in that direction. So there's going to be imbalances just as you see now. 7% of our people, 6% of our people are highly effective. 7% are developing. 77% are effective. I will tell you now, I expect those levels to be roughly the same this next year, even with a change in test because of the construct of the growth model. And I will be happy to talk with any of you about that throughout the next couple of days. But I want to make sure that we are very clear about the work that's in front of us. This is about making sure that our kids are in fact ready, not just for 9th grade, not just for 10th grade, but they are ready to graduate with legitimate choices for what the current economy offers and demands. Again, from higher ed's perspective, we are asking them, why are you admitting so many people into your elementary education program? As a rural school superintendent, I would have an elementary opening and have between 200 and 400 applicants. I had suburban districts near me that had upwards of 1,000 applicants. That's unconscionable. And so we're challenging higher education about what they're going to do about this to better match to the marketplace. We are challenging everyone who has a stake in this game to up the ante and to really go, just as we are, all in on making sure that we put our shoulders to the wheel to get our kids ready. We are not criticizing teachers for what you've done. In fact, we're celebrating the fact that you increasingly got more kids to cross the stage with a meaningful diploma. The problem is, systematically, that diploma has become less and less meaningful. Not your fault. Let's be very clear about that. But my challenge to each of you now, as we go through the next 2 days, is to do two things. Number one, every time you hear something that's useful to you, either it's a new resource, it's Engage 1.5, it's a module, it's a lesson, it's a performance task, text someone who's not here and tell them about it. Tell them to go to the website. Help everyone who's not in this room. So in fact, by the end of the 2 days, we can hit 6 rooms full of people like this, to make sure that all of us understand that we have one common goal: college and career readiness for every student that's in our school buildings. One more piece on this as we get ready to hear from Kate, who is the real content guru of the work. Commissioner spoke with us on Monday and talked that in the midst of all of this, there is one common thing, and he brought this from a fantastic book that had a great deal of impact on him when he was a kid, The Future King, I think, Once and Future King, where he talked about, at the end of the day, making sure that with everything, there is one common aspiration that all of us should have, and it's to learn. My challenge to each of you today is to set aside just a little bit of your expertise hat and take on the student hat. Greg Alquist, who is Teacher of the Year from Webster Central School out in the Rochester area, he was at the Teacher Advisory Committee that I spoke of a few moments ago, and he said it brilliantly at the end of that meeting. The Common Core gives me as a teacher the opportunity to become a student again and to learn as much as I can to reflect my learning back to my kids relative to what the core requires. My challenge to each of you is to learn your way through the next 2 days, share that learning here and outside, challenge one another, challenge us. We are co-learners in this experience. Challenge us to give you more, which we are fully prepared to do. Challenge us to answer your difficult questions, or at the very least to help you think it through. Because as we move forward, as we're looking at what comes next, and for some of you, the questions were coming up, what comes next is Park. And we're going down this path. Can we get it? We buy it. But what's going to happen when we have to shift over to Park? I want to be very clear about this because the blogosphere had multiple inaccuracies going yesterday, so let me be very clear about this. There are 2 things that have to happen for Park to move forward. Number one, our Board of Regents has to adopt PARC. We are a governing state on that board. We have fingerprints all over PARC, including the content frameworks that just came out last week. You will see a lot of New York State isms in those frameworks because that was really a collaborative build between the PARC states, the colleagues within PARC, a number of higher education institutions who said these are the right frameworks. It's the right engineering off of which to build curriculum and assessment. The board has to affirmatively adopt the PARC model. Not going to happen probably for another year. You say, fantastic, it means I'm going to be doing something that I may have to undo and or redo as I move forward. Second thing is, our board president, our chancellor, challenged us when we started talking about belonging to PARC to make sure that when the time came for the board to make this decision, that they had a legitimate choice. So what we're doing, and you'll see this first evidenced in the 3 through 8 assessments, we're building a system parallel to PARC. The item design is very similar to PARC in the sense that New York State is not aligning our assessments to the Common Core. We are building our assessments from the Common Core. What's the difference? Some states took their existing tests and they rephrased the question. They changed some of the reading passages, but they didn't do a wholesale reconstruction of the assessments. New York State has done that in 3 through 8. You will see us next year do that in high school assessments. You'll see us do that in the following year in more high school assessments. You'll also see us move forward with recommendations to the board and asks of the legislature to support computer-based testing pilots. We want to make sure that we can maximize what we can ask of our kids on those assessments to make sure that, A, we have the most meaningful assessments that are true reflections of what the Common Core requires. So to be very clear, 2 things went out in the blogosphere yesterday. New York State is not adopting PARC was one of them. Not true. We haven't decided that yet. New York State is absolutely adopting PARC, and we're going to have to change in 2 years. Absolutely not true. No decision has been made on PARC. Our system that we are building is parallel to PARC. So should we choose to go in that direction, it will be transparent to the field, and you will see that, in fact, you are already on track to be ready for PARC should we go in that direction. So again, my challenge to each of you is to learn your way through the next couple of days with the laser-like focus on the fact that we need to make sure that we are getting our kids ready for this new model that we're bringing forward for college and career readiness and to meet and exceed those aspirational goals. This is really challenging work, and again, we've brought together some of the finest thinking around the country to help you, to help us realize this work. The resources on Engage 1.5, we will build more. We've committed to having full curriculum in place by next summer. If there are things on Engage 1.5 that you think would be more helpful to you, let us know about it. We have a team here who does the builds for that website. We want to do everything that we can to be as supportive of you moving forward, but we also want to engage your deepest and best thinking around this work and what it looks like in the classroom. To help you understand what that looks like, let me introduce my colleague, Kate Gerson. Thanks very much.
I got it picked. I'm good. Good morning, everybody. I am so excited that it is finally secondary day because I am a secondary teacher myself, and I have been hanging out for 2 days with elementary people, and I am finally amongst my own people. So I cannot express enough how excited I am about that. We are here to do 3 things. We are here to get all of us smarter about 3 things. Thing number 1 is the shifts, which I'll talk about in a second. Thing number 2 is the content. For math people, that means the concepts, the math concepts, and for ELA people, that really means the text and the writing process. And the third thing we're here to get smarter about is the actual materials, how to use these materials, how to get started with these materials right now so that the materials can start to teach us how to teach this way. The good news about being a secondary teacher in the time of the Common Core is that every single one of us has already done this kind of work. We haven't done it for sustained periods of time, most of us. I'm sure there are people in the room who are living this way all day, every day. I certainly never did. But I for sure did, as an ELA high school teacher, have moments that looked like the Common Core. Sort of like 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 12 minutes, periods of time where I really had realized this kind of teaching where we reach that deep work, that analysis of text, that deep conceptual understanding. Most of you came to this work because you wanted to teach this way. Most secondary people came to this work because they love their content, because they know their content, and because they wanted to share it with students. So what the standards are doing is creating space and time for us to be able to do that. So there's about 200 or 300 people in the room who have heard me do this 95 times, but I'm going to do it briefly just so that we all have a common language and a common understanding about what we mean by the shifts. We throw this word around a lot. You're going to get into it very, very deeply together, but if you're in math, I want you to be aware of the ELA stuff. If you're in ELA, I want you to be aware of the math stuff. So just to have a common understanding of what we're talking about by shifts. We are talking about a set of transformations that must happen in every single classroom because the Common Core demands them. If we don't change our practice this way, we will not create the space, the time, the learning opportunities for our students to achieve the core. Period. We must change. We must shift. And so we've articulated 6 shifts in ELA and 6 shifts in math. In ELA, a lot of the headlines you've heard. So the first headline is nonfiction, more nonfiction, right? Heads nodding, yes, more nonfiction. But the trick is, that's shift number 1. Shift number 2 is it's not just more nonfiction, it's gaining knowledge about the world through nonfiction. It's asking students to make meaning about what is on the page, asking students to make meaning about what is in the world through the page. So the difference is, and secondary teachers love to hear themselves talk. So, come on, admit it. We're all very interesting, right? And so part of the shift for us is to stop telling stories. Part of the shift for us is to not be quite as excited about what we know and they don't, and the cool ways we have developed to tell them about those things, about the world. Now we must find ways to bring them into that history, into the science, into narrative, into fiction, all of the things that we have experienced about the world. We have to let students experience it for themselves. What this means for ELA teachers is that we can no longer perform novels. What this means for math teachers is that we can no longer perform math. We must now create opportunities for students to have these experiences for themselves. So in ELA, shift 1 is a balance of nonfiction and fiction. Shift 2 is knowledge through the disciplines, really making sure that students are gaining that knowledge about the world through text. Shift 3 is text complexity. We now know that the texts that we have been reading are 2 or 3 grade levels too low for the grades that we are teaching them in. For example, To Kill a Mockingbird is a classic 9th grade text. It is now in the 6 through 8 band. Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart is typically read at a 12th grade level. It now must be read at a 9th or 10th grade level. Really, almost everything that we have read in ELA is going to bounce down a year or 2 or even 3. That's shift 3. Shift 4 is evidence-based conversations about text. This is the most observable thing, principals. I want you to notice this. And teachers, when you're talking with other teachers about what is visible, what is tangible in your classrooms, the number one thing that you're going to be able to see and feel day to day and that your students will notice as a major difference is we are now having textual conversations. We're having evidence-based conversations about what is on the page in front of us. Where do you see it on the page, in the paragraph, in the sentence? Point to it, quote it, talk about what it means based on your own analysis. Shift 5 is writing from sources. So if we are creating classrooms where evidence-based conversations are happening, students are now building those habits of mind and are able to write this way. Students are no longer sort of talking about the text as if they've seen the movie. Students are now engaging in deep analysis of the text and using evidence from the text to make arguments about what the writer is up to. That's a significant shift, and it requires a departure from narrative. No longer are we spending so much of our writing time asking students to tell their lives. No longer are we asking students to develop voice by talking about what has happened to them or near them. Right? We are now asking students to develop their voice by conducting analysis about the world based on what they have read. That's a very different kind of classroom. It's a classroom of scholars. right? Shift 6 is vocabulary, academic language. We're talking about making sure that students gain the language of power by consistently reading increasingly complex texts. We're asking that we no longer spend so much time on words like onomatopoeia, and we spend much more time on transferable vocabulary that has impact across disciplines. That's ELA. In math and ELA teachers, you need to sort of tune into this piece also, because students' whole day is changing, right? So we need to be conscious of that and compassionate about that. So shift 1 in math is focus. The big news, and for most math teachers that I have talked to about this, the happy news is it's way less stuff. We're talking about way less stuff, and we're talking about reading it, doing it much more deeply. We're talking about reaching a level of understanding in math because we are creating time to go much more deeply on a very small number of concepts. That's focus. Shift 2 in math is coherence. So now we're talking about the way these things cohere across grades. Teachers are talking to each other about the way these concepts are fitting together across grades. Because the number one predictor of whether or not a student will be successful in college is whether or not they have mastered algebra. The number one predictor of whether or not they're going to master algebra is whether or not they master fractions. The number one predictor of whether or not they master fractions is whether or not they can handle positive and negative integers. And as secondary people, we know so often we inherit students in 9th grade who cannot yet do that positive and negative addition and subtraction, multiplication and division, right? So these are the things that we now know, is that there's a clear progression of these concepts across time that we must pay attention to. Shift 4 in math is fluency. Sorry, shift 3 in math is fluency. Fluency is the first piece of this rigor puzzle. So what the Common Core does for us is it tells us there are now components to rigor. We have a definition for rigor. So the first definition of rigor is fluency. Fluency is math facts. We're going to spend concrete time in classrooms around math facts. Shift 4 in math is deep conceptual understanding. So no longer are we going to cover, move on, sorry, Johnny, we'll get back to you. We are going to make sure that every single student has the ability to articulate mathematical reasoning around a number of different ways to get to the answer, to prove that they have mastered the math concepts. This is a very different way of thinking about math. No longer is it about the fastest way to yes. No longer is it about the fastest way to the correct answer. It is now about how am I thinking about this and how am I able to articulate those thoughts. Shift 5 in math is application. So we have fluency and we also have application. We are asking students to model. We are asking students to solve problems. We are asking students to make meaning about the world through math and solve problems that are presented to them without necessarily being prompted about the kind of math they're doing. Shift 6 in math is dual intensity. So we're very aware of the math wars in New York State in particular, but certainly across the country, where there's an argument about whether students should be fluent or students should be conducting application. The answer is everybody wins. It's both. So we have had sort of conflicts about how one should teach ELA and how one should teach math, and what the Common Core is telling us is that everybody wins. Students must be thinking deeply about what it is that they're doing. They must be conducting analysis. If we look at the new assessments and we have sample items, and for high school people, I really urge you to look at the state sample items that are on Engage or on the front page of engagenewyork.org. Make sure that you're looking at those sample assessment items, even if you're in 9th through 12th, because they really are an indicator of what's coming. They really are an indicator of what the assessments are going to do and the way New York is going to measure these standards. In math, students are being asked to solve multi-level problems, multi-step problems, and they're being asked to solve problems that measure multiple standards at one time. And ELA students are asked to marshal evidence to form an argument. And ELA students are asked to conduct analysis about very complex texts. So these things are happening. So probably for a few of you, the consequence of everything that I just babbled at you is a slight increase in anxiety. So I want you to notice that. Notice that my job in general is to provoke anxiety. And also know that you are in the right place to feel that anxiety. So I urge you to track it. I urge you to be aware of it and to watch it throughout these 2 days. Really notice what's happening, what is encouraging you, what is scaring you, which parts of your reaction are about, I don't know if I can do this, which parts of your reaction are about, I don't know if my kids can do this. Right? Really working to differentiate what your reactions are about, what your epiphanies are about. What we are hoping and what we have worked tirelessly to ensure is that your experience here is an opportunity to open up and say, I don't know how to do this, and to get some support in figuring out how. to get some materials, to get some resources, and frankly, to get some really concrete learning experiences that bolster you to go forth and do this work together. What we're also hoping is that you make connections across schools and across districts here today, that you're exchanging information with each other so that you're really able to build these relationships so that you can figure this out together. We are very certain that this is work that teachers must figure out together. We are very certain that this is about, okay, I'm going to try this. The shift is asking me to do this. I'm going to build this lesson plan. I'm going to use these materials that I got from Engage New York. I'm going to go take a whack at it. But it doesn't work unless you come back and talk to each other. It doesn't work unless you're really trying to problem solve this work together. We have three sort of collections of humans here that I want to talk to you about real quick. We have a team from the SED and from the organization that I'm a part of, which is the Regents Research Fund. We all work for Commissioner King, who, by the way, is, those of you who know him know that he's literally grieving right now that he cannot be here. But there are two groups of people who work for Commissioner King, and that is from the State Department and from Regents Research Fund. Can you all sort of stand up and wave so everybody knows who you are? Stand up, Mary. Come on. Everybody stand up. So this is us. This is our team. We are here to help you. We actually have, as you know, the registration desk upstairs. There's also an Engage New York help desk up there. If you can't find your way around Engage, we just rejiggered it a little bit. We're there to help you. We're here to make sure you know what you're doing on that website and with these resources. That's the first group of people that are here to help you. The second group of people that are here to help you is we have an ELA consortium that is working very hard to provide you professional learning experiences and resources, physical resources, to help you in your classroom. We'll talk a little bit more with the ELA folks after math folks go upstairs. But I want you to know that this is a group of people that are here to support your work. We also have a math consortium, a team of math people led by Andrew Chen, who's out of MIT, an organization called Edutron, and he is here to provide, again, learning experiences and materials to really help you get started in your classroom. I think that's all I want to say, except one last thing. We talk at Network Team Institute, we talk about two different orientations to the work. We talk about performance orientation, which is this sort of I got this, and we talk about a learning orientation. Performance orientation, if you are used to living in a performance orientation, it's an orientation that if you feel caught off guard or if you feel set up, it's very easy to become angry. And it's very easy to become exasperated, and it is actually hard to absorb new information. And so one of the things we want to assure you of is that none of us got this. Like, absolutely none of us who are leading this work have it all figured out. We are 100% in developing mode. We are 100% in learning mode. We are getting smarter at it every day, but we really want to invite you into the orientation that we have taken to this work, which is we are trying to get smart all the time. We are trying to get smarter about exactly how to execute on this in classrooms, exactly what kind of resources you need to get this work done. We are partnered with student achievement partners who are the central writers of the Common Core. Every piece of material that you are looking at and that you are working with has been sort of stamped by them. And the reason for that is because there is so much sort of bluffing happening nationally about what is Common Core alignment. And we are very clear that Common Core alignment has become a word that can be sort of weakened very easily and get thrown around. There's a lot of free gold stickers stuck onto textbooks, stuck onto conferences. Come learn about the Common Core. And we want to make sure that you know that we are learning about this every day, and the main folks that we're learning about it from are the guys that wrote the standards. So what that means is that you are learning directly from the guys that wrote the standards. So know that this is the safest place to not know, and that we are excited to watch you get smarter and to get smarter with you. Please talk to us. Please let us know what you're getting out of this, what you're not getting out of us. Please push us, and we will push you. We are so, so glad you're here. Math folks are going to head upstairs, to the stairs right behind you through that window, and ELA folks, all ELA folks are going to stay right here. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.